I've known Bruce for a long time, but it took me a while to work out his incredible backstory. Bruce was a political animal, basically. He was born and bred in Washington, D.C., and as a small child, his family was fortunate enough to share a barber with JFK. And Bruce, you lived near the White House, didn't you?
No, we lived up, I'm sorry. We lived up Connecticut Avenue, if you know Washington. So it's sort of like a big Monica, and that's where I grew up.
But thanks to the barber, Bruce and his father were given a special Secret Service tour of the White House. And as they went past the Oval Office, JFK was there, and because he knew his barber, Bruce was allowed to be hoisted up on his shoulders and see JFK. So, and then
I asked him a question, and he says, "Who the hell is that kid?"
Then he worked for Henry Waxman. He was on the float, the inaugural float for Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
And has known and worked for every president ever since. So he's a font of wisdom. So when Bruce first told me about this book, I thought you'd gone crazy, basically. I thought you were insane because I thought there was no chance that Trump was going to win another term. And then, of course, as usual, I was wrong. Can you tell us, Bruce, what's the likelihood of it?
I will, but before I start, just three people I want to say hello to who really made the book possible. Elizabeth Weiss is the publisher, and she is here, and thank you so much. Victoria Cooper was editorial and research assistant, and she is here, and really improved my work in immeasurable ways. And Leslie Russell is here, my wife, who contributed an astonishingly great chapter on the pandemic, Trump in Australia. So thank you all for being here. And Margot, when this event that Dan, was just so willing to do, wanted to do, they said, "Who?" And I said, "Margot." I mean, you were my first number one choice to do this. We've lived in Balmain together for 30 years, known each other since Fairfax days. And it's a real honor to be in discussion with you tonight. So thank you so much.
Well, I can just say I often interview authors whose books, I'm okay with, but I really love this one. Yeah.
I've heard worse. It's okay. It's great. Thank you. So
Trump.
Can he do it?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realise. I'd forgotten until I read your book that in fact Biden only won by 43,000 votes.
43,000 votes in 3 states, just because of the Electoral College and the way it works. He won the popular vote by 7 million votes. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes in 2016, and so I was. In the introduction, I'm confounded by how do you go from a Barack Obama to Donald Trump, the same country that would project the first black president and all the values and humanity that came with him and then do a big retreat. And the fact is, if they had direct popular election, Hillary Clinton would have won and the legacy would have continued and we would not have gone down these roads. But we did. So here we are today, and I think Trump has a better than 50% chance of getting the nomination, but a less than 50% chance of winning the election. But turnout is everything. We don't have compulsory voting in the United States. Compulsory voting ensures that the extremes are washed out. You don't have gun extremists skewing the election and winning seats in Congress or anti-abortion people or others. So here we just don't go down those roads, but there it is quite possible. And so let's talk about Trump and the nomination process and what his prospects are.
We were talking over coffee last week, and you said that I think 70% of Republicans now believe that the election was stolen.
Yes, and that's his base. And he has a real grip on his base. I was listening to, you can look it up, it was on the NewsHour last week, it was a video of a focus group in Iowa of Republicans around the table. It was a really interesting discussion. So they said, should Trump have been indicted? And they say no. Is he being persecuted? They say yes. And then when they're asked their opinions as to why and so forth, they repeat word for word his words in his reaction in the media. So this is an absorption of message that I hadn't seen before to that degree. And it shows the hold that he has. And what he's done as the indictments have come down, and he has all these, he's got immense burdens, is he's cornered the market in 2 respects. First, he's made it a political attack on him. In other words, this is political interference in an election of the highest order. The Democratic president has instructed the Democratic Attorney General to make sure his Justice Department has an indictment against his major political opponent to drive him out of the race. Well, that is a corrupt political system. His people buy it. And then when he's talking to anyone really, he'll talk to anybody, and he's explaining his position, but to his base, he's really saying, when they come after me, they're coming after you. And that is it's extremely potent. I mean, you have to, no matter what you think about him, he is one canny, cunning guy. I mean, he is really, really tough business. There's also some words from that he uses on the campaign trail. Yes, this is from rallies a weekend ago. He says, in the end, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you. And then he continues, either we have a deep state or we have a democracy. Either the deep state destroys America, the deep state being all of his opponents and their institutions, or we destroy the deep state. This is the final battle. I mean, this is almost biblical language, right? This is the final battle. But with you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. And that explains how he cements and continues to hold 40 to 50% of the Republicans who were voting, and 6 or 8 other candidates divide the other. Well, you do the math and you tell me how somebody stops him. Now, to stop him, it's going to require, you have to beat him in primaries. And that means you have to have a frontal assault and say, I'm a better candidate, he's a loser, we want to win, we can't stay with him, come with me. I haven't seen that yet. If we see it, it's possible. Without it, I don't know. I know this, though, I can't wait for the Florida primary. You can have Trump versus DeSantis. Trump versus DeSantis. DeSantis wins, and Trump says that was a stolen election.
Fox News has dropped Trump, hasn't it?
No. Brett Baer interviewed him last night and the night before. If you can watch the video, it's astonishing. He was talking about the Mar-a-Lago raid. And he just said, I said to them, please, 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 just give me time to go through the boxes and I'll give them up. And I've never seen a performance like that before. And the thing about Trump just going to, he defies gravity. There's no other political mortal who would survive what he has. A senator here touched some women. He's gone in 24 hours. I mean, a former prime minister appropriated cabinet portfolios. He was censured by the parliament. Trump was impeached twice, not convicted, and he's running again. He could be in jail and be still eligible under the Constitution to serve in office after he pardons himself and a few other people. Yeah.
Has really horrible bathrooms too, doesn't he? It's a real kleptocrat sort of.
The gold and that. Well, you saw the chandelier with the boxes. I mean, can you imagine cleaning that? I mean, my God, terrible. Terrible.
You say in the book that Trump is the most ruthlessly honest politician you've ever heard of. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, for a guy who lied 30,000 times, that's a fact-checked fact. While he was in office, I catch hell for that. I believe he's the most ruthlessly honest politician that we've had in a long time. In that, when he says, I'm against immigration, I'm for America first, I'm for protectionism, I'm for trade wars, I'm for isolationism, I'm for all that, he delivers. And that's why his base is rusted onto him. They trust him to stand up for them. And so that's why I call him the most ruthlessly honest politician in our lifetime. Other politicians backtrack, they make compromises. He doesn't. And he loses some things, but he doesn't lose on the major issue. In the eyes of his supporters, he doesn't lose on the major issues that they care about and they want him to project.
You had to explain the concept of nativism to me. One of his core...
I'm against immigrants. Okay.
Right. Oh, okay. So nativism just means whoever's been born in America and presumably is white.
He does very well with non-college educated white men. Very, very well. And then people who associated with him. That's the core of his base. The more educated you are, more people of color you are, he has much less pull. But when he declared... in 2016 for the presidency, he comes down the escalator that was also golden in Trump Tower, and he said his campaign speech was on immigration. He says Mexicans are pouring across our border, and we know they're all rapists, and they're coming after you. And again, there's nothing. He's not ashamed to say it. He's not ashamed. John McCain, war hero. And he's asked about McCain. He says, McCain's no war hero. He was captured. I don't have respect for him. I mean, my God. And he attacked the Pope. And the Pope, where I come from, you attack the Pope, you're finished. And I'm Jewish, I mean, can't do it. But he attacked the Pope on the immigration area. The Pope says we don't build walls. He wants to build walls. And Trump had the temerity to say, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. That's really something.
So he challenged the infallibility of the Pope.
He certainly did. I still think the Pope is infallible. So,
So what happened? Let's just go there. Trump's going to win in 2024. What does this mean for us?
Trouble. There are several things. First, let's talk about Trump today and what he's done. We have a big echo chamber here. I mean, we wake up to the news in the morning, and because of the way the news cycle works, it's U.S. news that dominates the first thing that you hear. So since he announced that he was running, and certainly as president, we wake up every morning and say, what the hell did he do last night? And he's done quite a lot last night, and that we absorb that. And then that goes into the political ecosystem. I hate that word, or culture. And it becomes part of people's thinking. And then certain things become possible to say that weren't possible to say earlier. So the news becomes fake media. That's fake news. There are a lot of politicians who said fake news. And anti-immigration sentiment. So even labor today cannot get away from stop the boats to a degree. So that's still cemented in there. Distrust of just a whole bunch of things questioned. So the echo chamber is there, so then the question, what happens with it, and we can get into safeguards of democracy that prevent it from getting out of control. But where he is today is to take that agenda and continue to prosecute it, dominate the Republican Party, and then get into next year. On the legal indictments issue, what will happen with him, first he will want to stretch out legal proceedings so that he will not have a completed trial by the time, if he is a nominee, by the time the election occurs. So I don't believe he will face the American people as a convicted felon, because I just think that won't happen. I just think it'll be dragged out after the election. He will also just try to, next year, all those issues will be very important, but the really big thing that is important is the economy, just like the economy here is the decider, more or less, of an election. So if you have an American economy, and our two economies are sort of in sync together in that we're at an interest rate peak, if interest rates recede, but joblessness doesn't go up too much, people feel more secure, there's more certainty, the outlook is clearer, that's a reward for Joe Biden, and he is in a stronger position and could be rewarded for it by re-election. On the other hand, if the economy gets worse than it is now, and people feel more insecure, more tense, more anxiety, that's Trump territory, and he knows how to push buttons to make people feel really worried about the future. So one other factor with the indictments and the legal situation is, just like there are teal voters here, and your book on teal voting on the teals was exceptional, it was great. The same factors exist in suburbs across the country, and particularly with women, the abortion issue being huge. And Trump, says it's my Supreme Court. I put those justices on the Supreme Court, and the first anniversary of Roe v. Wade is this weekend. And so it's a real moment of reflection and understanding of what's at stake here. So he will. Sorry, I lost my thought. But he will stay with those issues and.
He'll be
face the judge.
Just pressing those buttons.
He will press those buttons.
Yeah. So what if he gets in? Let's talk foreign policy now. He's already talked about getting rid of NATO and the UN. He wants an alliance with his best friend Vladimir Putin,
yes.
Possibly Xi Jinping, against Xi Jinping as well. Perhaps North Korea. He wants to send Taiwan back to China, and he wants to take troops out of the Asia Pacific. What would happen if any or all of those things took place?
At root, if you go back to the isolationism and the protectionism that is part of Trump and Trumpism, what he wants to do is upset all of the institutional arrangements that were put in place after World War II to provide stability, security, peace, and prosperity. And he doesn't believe in them. He doesn't believe they're good for America, and he doesn't want America to participate in them. So he wants to go and kick over the tables around the world. I think his biggest targets are the United Nations and NATO. but then I can't see him flying out for an ASEAN meeting in the Asia Pacific anytime soon. And I think he wants to really disengage from that. I think he always looks at the American military presence as having a transactional, a cost component to it. Are the people who are hosting bases, are they paying fair share for the protection of American troops, for the American troops who are there? He was within an hour, according to Woodward, of signing a piece of paper which would have withdrawn all the troops from South Korea. And that would have had, I still think he wants to do that. As far as Australia is concerned, you have to give real tribute to Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison, Arthur Sinodinos, and Joe Hockey for managing the relationship. The book gets to, there are two major issues: managing those policy issues, foreign policy, economic policy, trade policy, then the existential issues of democracy, what happens to democracy there and how does that affect us. But on the policy issues, Australia did well. It was not a Trump target. He came to really like the country. I mean, thank goodness Morrison didn't invite him out to play golf. I mean, that would have been really bad. I was here when George W. Bush came out during the Iraq War, and there were people throwing stones in the streets of Canberra, if people remember that. And it would be far worse if Trump ever visited here.
And what was Morrison's technique for dealing with Trump?
I think he wanted to attune himself to Trump and his personality as much as possible, so as not to get the man aggravated. And it was rewarded with a state dinner at the White House. And it was quite an event. It was a very successful, in Australia's terms, for Australia's interests, it was a very successful event. He even saw the bathroom in the second floor. Honestly, it's there. So they will. So the challenge for Australia will be, how does it absorb what Trump could do in a second term on all that inventory of relationships, strategic engagement, alliances, and so forth, and then how do you prepare for it? And so what I'm arguing in the book is, let's talk about that now, or let's do the planning now, so that in 2024 Australia can be proactive in figuring out what could happen instead of being reactive in 2025 and doing it on a very fast, expedited, short-term basis. So that's what I hope. I hope that discussion unfolds in the months ahead. We shouldn't be afraid of it. Now, the consensus of the foreign policy experts that I talked with, and I talked with former officials, I didn't talk with current officials. Talking with current officials, people in Parliament and Congress, it's sort of like watching Q&A. If you see a politician on Q&A, it's just talking points. It's not their real opinion about things. But people who have served both parties, both governments, at very senior levels, they have really good views, strong, clear views about what should happen in not an extreme situation, but a challenging situation. And the consensus was, I was really taken by it. This is Labor and Liberal officials, Republicans and Democratic officials out of Washington serving Republican and Democratic presidents. And what they said was Australia should simply continue to do what is already underway, build a commanding presence of Australian interests and values in the Asia Pacific. Strengthen your diplomatic teams, strengthen your foreign aid, expand your reach, have ties with all of the countries that are important to us in the region, and strong enough that it can stand on its own, no matter what the United States does. So under good or bad scenarios, under Biden or Trump, that's a valuable thing for Australia to do, so Australia stands cleanly and clearly. And that is underway. If you look at everything that Penny Wong is doing as foreign minister and the Prime Minister is doing in his role, look at the countries they visited, look at where they've taken situations back that were under threat, like the Solomon Islands. But that shouldn't be a one-off thing from this year. That's got to be built. We're talking years of continuous, good, hard diplomatic work. We don't have armies to send to these countries, so we need to send goodwill, good aid, good diplomacy, and programs that tie the peoples together. And so I'm very hopeful on that front.
Have they been able to repair, in climate change terms, the damage that was done by the previous administration? I
think so. I mean, this government stands for 2050 and targets in 2030 and so forth, and it may not be sufficient for the Asia Pacific islands who are, the water's lapping at their cities. But they know Australia's in a better place than it was, and that's good. But Trump will, he hates climate. He hates the programs to fight climate change. He wants to drill every drop of oil in the United States that he can possibly get. Another gold thing that he likes to go on about. And so we're not going to, if America stands for leadership for things that we want, that's going to be gone because he's not going to stand for climate. He's not going to stand for diplomacy as opposed to global diplomacy as opposed to the bilateral relationship that he wants to form with what he believes are the most powerful people in the world. So he wants something with Putin, he wants something with Xi, he wants something with Kim Jong-un in Korea, in North Korea, he wants something with Viktor Orban in Hungary. He gets along with Bibi Netanyahu extremely well. And there's going to be a class of favored diplomats. He's not going to deal, he doesn't care for Trudeau very much. He doesn't, I don't know what he thinks of the UK Prime Minister. I think Macron, I think that love affair is over. So he's going to do this. He likes to say, I can solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours. It's over. I'll tell you what happens. In the first 10 minutes, he calls Putin, he says, Ukraine, it's yours.
How do you describe Kim Jong-un?
I haven't read the love letters, but they have a very special relationship.
They do. They're very close.
But what has to be appreciated was, so we did this, I call it spectacle diplomacy, where you have people riveted. He's stepping over into North Korea, and they're meeting and everything. And it is really dramatic. But under that, in the first term and continuing afterwards, Kim has built up his nuclear arsenal several-fold. So what do we get out of it? Nothing. There's no more security. We're less secure because of North Korea today than we were when he started the love affair. Yeah.
Speaking of the opposite of a love affair,
yes.
What does he think of our current Prime Minister?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think they're going to get along very well. I think I do have a little episode in the book where I try and get in Trump's head and talk about what I think he thinks about Prime Minister Albanese. And let me just put it this way. You don't look like a prime minister. I don't like your suits. I don't like your glasses. I don't like your voice. You come from poverty. You're a socialist, a radical, Marxist, communist. Now, what did you want to talk about?
Yeah, no,
yes.
Exactly.
I hope they tape that conversation. There's a deeper point. Trump, when the insurrection happened here in Australia, Scott Morrison declined to say anything about the insurrection. Albanese was very strong on that. Gun control, when gun violence erupts in the United States, the Prime Minister is out there talking about it. Abortion rights, the Prime Minister is out there talking about it. Trump will be well briefed before his first phone call as to what the Prime Minister said about what he stands for. And that's where they're going to start from.
There are some terrible culture wars that are being waged in the US at the moment.
Are you kidding me? Trans what?
Can you describe some of them? And then we'd like, just if you could talk about why they're not actually translating to Australia.
I'm really amazed. Leslie and I were in the United States in March, April, and the hysteria over transgender rights and identity and everything is just shocking. It's the number one issue among Republican voters and Republican leaders. They talk about it incessantly, and dozens of bills have been introduced in dozens of states on that issue. So that's huge. Abortion and defending what the Supreme Court did is another. Immigration is a third. And then the weaponization of the Justice Department and how the political system is working there is another one. Guns, of course. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to leave my house unarmed. You want to leave your house unarmed? And it's, and these, you look at Ron DeSantis, woke is a four-letter word that he loves. He uses it all the time.
He's trying to shut down Disney, isn't he? Yeah.
I think Mickey Mouse has the better position. I think he's stronger than DeSantis. But he uses, so when Disney expresses sympathy for LGBTQI people, he starts moving against Disney and takes away its tax benefits in the state. And he says, if they continue, I'm going to put a prison right next to Disney's property. He's an extremely effective governor and has clout in two ways. He won re-election with 60% of the vote. It was a 20-point margin, and he was winning in Democratic areas, particularly among Hispanic Americans, but there are several gradations of Hispanic Americans. There are Cuban Americans, South American, Americans, Central American Hispanics, but he's getting significant support from those voters. And that's why he looks like a real potential winner against Biden and the Democrats, because he's taking Democratic votes away. He's really effective. He has command of the legislature, veto-proof majorities, and he uses it like a machine gun to put law after law on all these culture button issues. Another one that's huge is schools, and how much control parents have over schools and books. They're taking books. They're taking Toni Morrison's books off of library shelves in schools across America. In Utah, people complained that the Book of Mormon is too explicit and should be removed from bookshelves in Utah. I mean, we're laughing and crying at the same time. Book burning is a Nazi thing. It's not an American thing.
And none of these ideas have really gained much traction here in Australia, despite the efforts of the far right wing of the Liberal Party to generate a whole lot of heat about it.
Yes.
What has stopped us from succumbing to these?
Sensibility, rationality.
Education.
Education. But the real things that prevent it are these. My book has a happy conclusion. Australian democracy is healthy, robust, vital, and will succeed and will withstand Trump. Trump will not take Australia's democracy away from it. And the guardrails are that ensure that more common middle ground positions emerge are compulsory voting. Again, the extremes do not control anything. The Westminster system. Clive Palmer cannot become Prime Minister. Pauline Hanson cannot become Prime Minister. Twiggy Forrest cannot become Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is selected as the person who heads the majority party in the House of Representatives. And that means that a person has served in the Parliament. Trump, Mark Shields used to have an expression saying, I kind of wish that guy had run for dog catcher once and had won because he'd understand what public service is all about. So you have people who are really experienced in the culture. It's part of them. That means they won't step out of it. Even with hardline ideologues like Tony Abbott. I mean, at the end, there's still respect for the system works, okay? He was there. He was ousted. Others come in. Labor still wins. Normal, and that's the way it kind of should be. So no outsider can come in like Trump and take over the political system, and that's healthy. We also have a depoliticization of sensitive positions. Like there's no Senate confirmation of judges who are asked how they're going to vote on abortion. There's no Senate confirmation of members of the Reserve Bank of Australia, and so there's no. Donald Trump tried several times to fire the head of the Reserve Bank. He didn't. And the Reserve Bank here, I was very happy in the review that was done, they put even farther below into the bureaucracy the decision making on interest rates. So it is farther away from political influence than it was even now, and there wasn't any now. Look at the treasurer and the relationship between the treasurer and the governor. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but no one is claiming scalps. So these things are in place and they work. But it's really the compulsory voting system that ensures that we're going to be okay. In America, the voting system is decided by all 50 states, and so each state has its own requirements, who can vote, when they can vote, and so forth. The element that is so ugly in the United States is that voting rights are affected by race. And you see in conservative states they're making rules as to who can vote when, how many ballot boxes are around, depending on who's living in what area, and things like that. Even though we have enormous issues of racial equity in Australia, and The Voice embodies that this year, voting rights are not associated with race. And when someone puts proposals up to say, oh, I want more identity checks of voters, show us your papers as you go to vote, that's knocked back. It doesn't happen. It's stopped. And that is a really healthy system, and it's something to admire. E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post, great, he's just a wonderful, wonderful person. Great writer, deep. He did a book on Australia's democracy. It's called 100% Democracy. And he says Australia's standard of voting is the gold standard for the world. And it is. And E.J. knows this book and endorses Australian values wholeheartedly. And he's trying to figure out ways that universal voting can come to America. I used to think you do it from the top down. You do it from the bottom up. So sort of like ranked choice voting, preferential voting is being introduced in certain electorates. It actually stopped Sarah Palin from winning a Senate race in Alaska in November. I've thought for a long time that if two small states like Utah and Vermont, and of course if the Book of Mormon is taken out of Utah, if Utah and Vermont could get together and say, we're going to try for universal voting, and they show the benefits of it, that it could infect other states. Something like that I think could be really nice.
You say in the book that it was Sarah Palin who actually is responsible for Trump. Can you explain to us how that works?
No. But Barack Obama thought that Sarah Palin, that what she represented, and I mean, we laughed at her. I mean, I can see Russia from my backyard and all that stuff. Her presence at that level of a ticket unleashed a comment that was previously illegitimate. So she legitimized, and then Trump super legitimized things that, you know, had never occurred before in American politics, and things that were said that had never been said before.
And that part of the electorate responded to her very positively, didn't they?
Yes.
The more inarticulate she was, the more stupid she was.
Yes.
People liked her.
And I mean, I don't know how far McCain and Palin were going to get. I mean, after 8 years of Bush, it was time for a change, and I think Barack Obama would have won under any circumstances. There was also a terrible recession, the global financial crisis that was underway under Bush, and so their fate was sealed. But her the passion she unleashed are still there. Yeah.
Bruce, in your long career, you've seen a transformation of the Republican Party from the party.
It's not my father's Republican Party.
It's not your father's Republican Party. We've seen some enormous changes in the Conservative parties here in Australia in the last decade or so. Can you see any parallels there?
No, I still think the Republican Party in modern times has been defined by Ronald Reagan and now Donald Trump. And Reaganism was for a strong international posture of the United States, the defeat of the Soviet Union. He also supported rational immigration legislation so that people could come to the country and help build the country. He was very conservative on moral values and policies, and he was for smaller government, lower taxes, and all that stuff. But it was part of the mainstream political debate, and you work through it. Trump, on the other hand, is a radical revision of republicanism. So we see examples of it on the international stage where Trump clearly does not want Ukraine to succeed. And so there's a split now in the Republican Party. How much aid should Congress give to the Ukrainians? And how that turns out is going to be a real marker as to where the Republican Party goes. But where the Republican Party goes is also dependent on next year's election and the election after that and the election after that. Trumpism, the only way to beat Trumpism is to beat Trump. And the only way to beat Trumpism is for the Republican Party to lose successive elections. Political parties want to win. If you're losing, sooner or later you get it, and you change tack. And if the Republicans lose the next presidential election and the one after that, all this stuff recedes. It's like a tide going out, but it takes time. I wish it was 12 hours, but it's not.
I'm just going to ask you one last question, and then we'll throw to questions from the audience. So if you've got a question, please put your hand up.
Johnny Apple once said, Leslie and I were at a speech and heard Johnny Apple, and he said, and one last question, he said, okay, one last question, you. And the person stands up and says, why is the New York Times such a lousy newspaper? So, yeah, one last question.
We have several employees of the Sydney Morning Herald here tonight, so no criticism, please. Thank you.
Well, we're both Fairfax. Right? I mean, we love the Sydney Morning Herald, and we respect Nine, and it's good.
So why the topic that's we're all talking about, we're all thinking about the voice.
Yeah.
Why is the voice important, and why should it be passed?
It's because of the echo chamber that I talked about. You say racist things in America, they're heard here, and people say racist things here. I mean, in Nazis marching outside of Parliament, Nazis marching in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Yeah.
People at the height of the pandemic carrying gallows in the streets of Melbourne. Gallows were carried outside the Capitol and saying, "Hang Mike Pence."
Yeah.
So it's the stuff coming over the ocean is going to keep coming. The voice is the biggest insulation for that, a buffer, because that would be a decided decision of the Australian people to make sure that racial equity issues are going to be addressed. It won't control anything, but it will give the country a stronger sense of assurance that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, for history and for our destiny. And so I think that's why one columnist from another newspaper said that this notion that the world is watching Australia and what happens with The Voice, that's nothing. He is dead wrong. Everyone is watching what happens with The Voice here. We have bureau chiefs from the New York Times and the Washington Post here. When Stan Grant decided to take leave for a while and figure things out, that was written up in both the Times and the Post. So Washington gets it. And so attention is going to be paid here, and how far Australia has advanced or gone backwards since the last referendum on race issues in this country.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Are there anyone? Yes, a question? So this gentleman here, yes.
Tony.
I'll promise to be as brief.
No speech.
Unlike
just questions.
normal.
Okay.
Okay. Parallels to 2016.
Yeah.
Trump's massively ahead in the polls. We have a huge field with 13, 14 at the moment. Tim Scott, all kinds of people.
Yeah.
Ron DeSantis looks like the most hopeless campaigner and zero personality.
Well, let me answer Go ahead.
Despite his attractions.
Let me answer that this way.
So I just have to repeat the question for the live stream.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're asking about the field of candidates in 2024 in comparison with 2016.
Yes, because so far it seems to be panning out that way. And then I want to add the reference to 2020.
Yep.
Where I very kindly sat next to Bruce in the MCA, and you guys, US Studies Centre, previewed the 2020 race. In that situation, Biden was way behind, did abysmally in New Hampshire, and then COVID, bang, came out of the blue. They all hit the wall in North Carolina, and they all dropped out. That dynamic, when we were sitting there in January, was unforeseen.
Yeah.
Are we going to see other elements that could spring a surprise? Despite the fact that people like Larry Saputo, Norm, and all your other colleagues who are incredibly well read.
All right. Thank you.
We get it.
Okay, we get it. There will always be surprises. Joe Biden lost Iowa, lost New Hampshire in early February. A month later, he was the nominee. Yeah. So anything can happen. On the Republican side, I'd say watch Tim Scott. I think he's a very, very interesting politician. He is conservative. He is very religious, evangelical, but he has a compassionate, outward-reaching posture. And I think he could, in small states like Iowa and New Hampshire, retail campaigning, I think he could connect with voters, and he may surprise on the upside. I think he's the obvious vice presidential choice if he doesn't make it all the way.
Sorry, there's a lady at the back, yeah?
What do you think will happen with AUKUS if Trump gets in?
What do I think will happen with AUKUS? I think it will become very transactional. As when I'm discussing, troops and, are the countries paying for troops, I think he's going to look at AUKUS and say, first of all, there is the potential Albanese issue. There's also the UK issue. He's not going to get along with the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, particularly Starmer, as well as he did with Boris and so forth, and Mars. But I think he'll look at AUKUS and say, well, what does this mean for the U.S. bottom line? Where's the money going? How many jobs are there? Maybe these contracts need to be renegotiated, and we need more of the jobs done here, more of the technology controlled in the United States. I mean, here being the United States. And so I think he could squeeze on that. That's the obvious thing that he could go through. But then there's a larger strategic issue. If China doesn't like AUKUS, and Trump wants a prime relationship with China, and he could have a prime relationship with China if AUKUS kind of fades, that could be something promising to discuss as well. So there are many permutations, but AUKUS would not be as strong as it is today, in my opinion.
Yeah, hi. History often repeats itself. Does Trump remind you of any historical figures?
Does Trump remind me of any historical figure? Yes, he reminds me of Lindbergh. He reminds me of Father Coughlin.
Yes.
He reminds me of Huey Long in Louisiana, and we know how he died. And there are, you can look it up and you'll see. The strain of populism and First Americanism and nativism and protection comes and goes in cycles in America. And sometimes it breaks out into really new levels, like with Trump. Other times it makes eruptions, but they're handled. Pat Buchanan, who else am I thinking about? In the early 90s, challenging George H.W. Bush. They had resonance, but they didn't succeed. Trump succeeded in ways that we never anticipated.
Sorry, any more questions? Sorry, Jane, yes.
What should the Democrats be doing now? Should they be putting Biden up again? Is that...
I know he is 80 years old, and it has an effect. I mean, Democrats greatly like Biden, but they're not as enthusiastic about Biden, and so the effect of his age and how he's viewed, he's gotten tremendous success under difficult circumstances. I think it's just going to depress turnout. I think younger voters are not going to turn out in huge numbers for Biden, and that could be the margin of defeat if it comes. But if the economy is good, Biden has all his marbles. In my opinion, his mind is absolutely clear. You look at his, and he steps up for major events, the State of the Union being one. He gave a speech a couple days ago. I thought he looked terrific, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He also likes to be underestimated. Prime Minister Albanese likes to be underestimated.
Yeah, yes.
And he keeps overperforming where he is, but it could be. I come back to the economy. If it's bad, the president owns the economy, and people, if they're unhappy, they're going to take it out on the president.
Would it be parallel to 84?
Let's have other questions.
Yes.
Margaret.
Would you speak a bit about the role of the media and any similarities between the kind of media presence you're trying to push a line as in comparison with what goes on in the U.S., particularly in Murdoch?
In my research and discussions, I found a lot of people thinking that the Murdoch media, they believe the Murdoch media is very dominant, has a huge influence, and really skews politics in this country. My examination of it is not as much as people think it is. In other words, you look at the election in Victoria, where they were trained, Andrews was in the crosshairs of the Murdoch media month after month. He wins. Yeah. They didn't like Labour and Albanese. Labour wins.
They hated the Teals.
Hated the Teals. The Teals win.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they're there. They're powerful. They have voices and so forth. But who's listening? You hear them, but who's listening? And so I think we're in a different cycle. I think there's a structural answer as well, in that in the older days, when in fact their dominance could be translated quite highly effectively, let's say the Howard era and previous, the landscape is, there are so many more outlets now. I just think that it's more, not deregulated, it's more competitive, more places for people to go to get information, and I think that dilutes their power. So I've read Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd evidence in the Senate and the reports and all that stuff, and God bless them. But I think the people are making decisions that are really outrunning that question, at least for now.
I mean, the Murdoch media's been campaigning against Clover Moore for decades, and she's about to become our longest-serving politician.
Yeah. Looks like Russia here. It's unbelievable. Have you ever seen so many people in coats in the middle of winter? That's what the Soviet Union was like in 1955.
I just said to Bruce, I thought you were all going to queue for a loaf of rye bread afterwards. Any other questions? Yes, Billy.
Hey, Billy, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just on the media, I just wondered what your thoughts on the liberal media in the US and how they cover Trump. They're really struggling with it. We saw CNN have the town hall and that, the chief had to quit and so on. How does the liberal media cover Trump? And what stakes?
I think the biggest criticism that a lot of Democrats have is that they go to two-sidism, too much. I mean, that's the classic way all media organizations should be. But they find that how can you have two equal sides between Trump and reality? And so by doing that, and the Hunter Biden coverage, I think, is really, they dive deep on it and say terrible things that he did, and there's got to be accountability everywhere. Well, maybe it's not as real a story as people believe. So I think there's an identity issue with liberal media that they have to work through. They haven't succeeded in doing it yet. I think that the pure voices are the best, like MSNBC, for example. But I think the Times, the Post have issues in figuring out, okay, how do we tell? When I write with the Herald, what I want to do is, even though everyone knows my pedigree, I want people here to understand why they are seeing what they are seeing. If media would do that, that would be really great. I just hope people have a clearer understanding of why they are seeing what they are seeing. Yeah. Sometimes I fail at that.
Yeah, yes, lady here, yeah.
Kim.
Hi, Bruce. Great. Really look forward to reading the book. What do you think of Kamala Harris, and how do you rate her vice presidency compared to others?
I think she's done a better job. The question is Kamala Harris and how I rate her vice presidency and possibly her future and where it is. I think she's done a better job than is appreciated. And I think there's a failure in communication on her record and so forth. If you look at where she's traveled, she's met every foreign leader. She is engaged in very substantive discussions. I think there was an issue of what she would be responsible for when the administration started, but now it's settled onto very good territory for her, particularly abortion rights, guns, violence, police reform, things like that. So I think she has a stronger, clearer voice. But I think feeling has set in that she's not up for it and would be trouble. Trouble politically for the Democrats if in fact she was the front runner. I think Biden chose her because he believes in her and believes she is excellent. And he chose her for the same reason that Barack Obama chose him, which is that if something happened to him, she had it to step in and be a good president. He still believes in that. And that's the primary reason why he kept her on. The second reason is, honestly, if he had put her aside, I think the black vote would have collapsed completely. And that's just part of the equation in modern American political life. So both those things worked. If Biden could not complete, if something happens between now and the election with Biden, if terrible things befall Biden, what happens? There would be immense pressure on him to leave the field. She would become president, but then there would be an open, she would not be the presumptive nominee. I think there would be an open process. I think Democrats would contest her. Now, no one has contested Biden, really going to your question, why? And the answer to that goes back to 1980 and Jimmy Carter, and it's in the Democratic Party's DNA. I was there at the time, me and Jimmy Madison. No, I was there at the time. Jimmy Carter had a terrible economy with inflation, and he had the Iran hostage crisis. So the country was going backwards. After the country went forwards, he defeats Gerald Ford, after Nixon, Watergate, and is a healing force. So the country's going backwards, and he is really in bad shape. And so Teddy Kennedy challenges him and wants to wrest the nomination from him. It was a bitter battle. Carter won, but was so weakened by that fight that he lost to Reagan in a landslide. Now, most Democrats were born after that, but that is in their DNA, and they knew if there had been a challenge to Biden this year, they would be finished next year. And that's why there's no challenge to Joe Biden. Plus, he is a good president. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question. Yes, the lady here. Yeah.
Do you think there's a possibility of civil war if Trump loses?
There are a lot. I think there's a possibility. Civil war is a really big subject. I think there's a real and present danger of violence in America, just more political violence. We saw before the insurrection, you may recall, in Michigan, men with long rifles went into the State House.
Yeah.
I mean, how intimidating is that?
Yeah.
Well, that was about a year before the attack on the Capitol. And I think there's going to be more political violence of that type. So that really worries. I think it worries a lot of people. Yes.
Any more questions?
I'm glad we solved everything.
Oh no, the lady up the back.
I just wondering if you actually ever feel that whatever it is he has.
Yeah. I've not met Trump. People I know who have met Trump feel that he's in a small room. He really knows. Who told me this? Julia Baird. She was with Maureen Dowd in the New York Times editorial office in 2016. They were interviewing Trump before, this is like January, February 2016. And she said he read everyone in the room. He knew exactly how to approach them, and he knew how to take them down. And so he has this animal instinct, that is extremely potent. He is. I'm really. He keeps surprising me, not in good ways, but he surprised me. The retail campaigning he's doing in Iowa. I mean, we've seen him for years now at big rallies and so forth. First, that he goes on for 90 minutes like Castro is just unbelievable. Second, I wonder what he's wearing underneath his pants. But third, he in Iowa and New Hampshire, if you watch him now carefully, the retail campaigning is tremendous. I mean, he sees everyone shakes their hand. He's a germaphobe, but he's shaking everyone's hand, and he's I think it's very effective. I think he really knows what he's doing. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you, everyone. Bruce is be signing copies of the book. So if anyone would like a signed copy of the book and a chat to Bruce, please into the next room. Yes.
I just want to close with one thing. I just want to thank everyone for coming. This is really terribly exciting and eventful, and I'm so glad for your interest in these things. And I really do hope Australians think through some of these questions so that we can be better prepared in next year and the year after.
And I just can't believe you've all come out on this absolutely freezing cold night and it's State of Origin. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.